Madagascar, 1828. Smoke rises over the palace. The scent of charred flesh drifts across the wind. Inside the royal courtyard, a fire still burns its embers, crackling softly beneath the bodies of those who dared to challenge the crown. And at the center of it all stands a woman. Her dress is black as night, her eyes veiled beneath a crown of gold and bone. She does not speak, she does not mourn, she simply watches as the flames devour the last of her enemies. Some say she smiled, some say she danced. All agreed on one thing: power now had a new name, Ranavalona, and she would stop at nothing to keep it. Within weeks of her rise, nobles were impaled, poisoned, buried alive. Others were tied to trees and left for the ants. She brought back the ancient poison trials. She outlawed foreign religions. She slaughtered her rivals and anyone who dared remember their names. But was she insane, or was she something else entirely? To the West, she was a demon, queen, cruel, primitive, barbaric. But to her people, she was something more. The last wall, the last fire, the last queen who said no. This is not just a tale of cruelty. This is a story of resistance, of fear, of absolute power in the hands of one woman who refused to bow. A queen who ruled not with a crown, but with flame, and whose legend was written not in ink, but in ash. This is Dark Queens. Before the fire there was silence. Before the executions there was a girl. Her name was Ramavo. Born sometime around 1782 in the central highlands of Madagascar, she was not destined to wear a crown. She was the daughter of an ordinary Manathing royal, nothing remarkable. But fate in her case was not blind. Her father, a loyal subject of the reigning king Andrianampoina Marina, uncovered a treasonous plot to assassinate the monarch. As a reward, the king adopted the girl into the palace and promised her hand to his son, Radama. And so, a girl with no noble blood became a princess. But marriage did not mean power. Prince Radama was brilliant, ambitious, and fascinated by the West. He dressed in European suits, learned French, invited missionaries to the court, and dreamed of modernizing Madagascar. Ranavalona watched from the shadows. Her voice was soft, her presence quiet. She had no army, no title, no child. Just eyes, always watching. When Radama became king in 1810, she became queen consort, but she was not loved. Radama surrounded himself with foreign advisors, traded heavily with the British, and embraced Christianity. He banned traditional rituals, outlawed the Tangina poison trials, and opened missionary schools. The kingdom was changing, and Ranavalona knew it would not change in her favor. Then, in 1828, Radama died suddenly. No heir, no will, no plan. And just like that, the throne of Madagascar became a battlefield. The nobles scrambled to install a new king they could control, Christian-friendly, European-backed, quiet. But they had made one fatal mistake. They underestimated the quiet queen. In the dead of night, Ranavalona moved. With the help of high-ranking military officers still loyal to the old ways, she seized the royal palace. Her enemies were arrested, disarmed, or killed before sunrise. By dawn, she stood before the court not as the widow of a king, but as a ruler in her own right. Her first act? Purge. Radama's family, his ministers, his foreign sympathizers all were hunted down. Some were hanged, others burned, some buried alive. Those who resisted were dealt with in full public view. Ranavalona declared herself Queen of Madagascar by ancestral right, by military support, and by divine blessing. And to make her point unmistakably clear, she ordered a sacred ritual at the palace gates. Animals were sacrificed, bull's blood was poured into the earth, her name was shouted into the wind. Then she issued a single warning: no one shall follow a foreigner's god, no one shall betray this land, and no one shall speak my name without bowing. She had no royal blood, but she had something better: force, fear, and purpose. Ranavalona wasn't claiming the throne for glory. She was claiming it to stop what she saw as invasion. Cultural, political, spiritual. She believed that if Madagascar embraced the West, it would lose its soul. And so, to save her kingdom, she would destroy anyone who tried to change it. What began that day wasn't just a reign, it was a war, and Ranavalona was ready to fight it alone. With the throne secured, Ranavalona did not celebrate. She did not pause. She did not forgive. She began to erase. Her reign became an iron curtain of fear, violence, and control. Enemies, real or imagined, were eliminated, sometimes swiftly, sometimes slowly, always publicly. She revived the ancient practice of Tanginar brutal ritual trial by poison. Under this law, anyone accused of a crime or simply suspected would be forced to eat 3 pieces of chicken skin and then swallow a toxic mixture made from the tangina nut. If they vomited it back up and survived, they were innocent. If not, they were guilty. It didn't matter if the accusation was theft, treason, or sorcery. The poison decided everything. Estimates say that in some years, over 3,000 people died from Tangina trials alone. Villagers, officials, servants, anyone could be accused, and anyone could vanish. But Tangina was only one method. Others were burned alive at the stake, accused of witchcraft or sedition. Some were thrown off cliffs as entire towns watched. In one infamous case, an entire family was buried up to their necks and left for days beneath the sun, the birds, and the insects. And when rebels rose against her in secret, she responded with unmatched brutality, burning entire villages, crucifying suspected ringleaders, and placing their heads on pikes along the roads into the capital. Ranavalona ruled through fear because she believed fear was more loyal than love. And in her mind, she wasn't being cruel. She was being careful. To her, every convert to Christianity was a spy. Every foreign trade deal was a Trojan horse. Every whisper of rebellion was a spark that could set the kingdom on fire. So she extinguished those sparks with flame of her own. In 1835, she made her boldest move, a royal edict that expelled all Christian missionaries and outlawed the practice of Christianity under penalty of death. Bibles were banned. Missionary schools were shut down. Prayer meetings were raided. Converts were tortured and executed, many in slow, symbolic ways. Some were forced to carry massive crosses up hills, only to be pushed off the edge. Others were crushed to death between slabs of stone. A group of Christian women were tied together and flung into a river singing hymns as they sank. And Ranavalona, she watched. Reports from the time describe her sitting silently, high above the executions, in full royal attire, expressionless, as the crowd screamed below. Some say she kept a tally, others say she never blinked. But not all of her cruelty was against faith. Political dissent was punished just as harshly. Nobles who spoke out were poisoned at feasts. Advisors who hesitated during meetings disappeared overnight. Even her own court lived in terror. One wrong word, one raised eyebrow, one silent disapproval, and your name would vanish from the scroll. Ranavalona understood the power of unpredictability. She weaponized silence. She ruled not just with blood, but with uncertainty. One day she would grant mercy, the next order an entire village erased. And yet, despite all of this, despite the poison, the executions, the fear, she kept her kingdom alive. While other African monarchs were colonized or replaced, Ranavalona remained untouchable, untamed, because terror, for her, was not a flaw, it was a tool, a language, and she spoke it fluently. To understand Ranavalona's cruelty, you have to understand what she feared. Not rebellion, not rivals, but empire. During her reign, the world was changing and fast. The British Empire was tightening its grip on Africa. The French were advancing across the Indian Ocean. Colonies were falling one by one. Cultures erased. Kingdoms renamed. Flags replaced. And from their ships and churches, the Europeans brought 3 weapons more dangerous than any gun: commerce, conversion, control. Ranavalona saw it coming. She had watched her late husband, King Radama I, embrace British customs trading treaties for muskets, opening Christian schools, adopting European fashion and French wine. For him, modernization meant progress. For her, it meant surrender. So when she seized power, she didn't just execute rival nobles, she attacked the very foundation of colonial influence, and it started with faith. Christianity wasn't just a religion to her, it was an invasion, a silent conquest. The missionaries arrived with smiles and sermons, but their message carried a second voice. You must become like us. Ranavalona refused. She expelled the London Missionary Society, she banned the Bible, she declared the royal ancestors the spirits of Malagasy kings and queenses, the only sacred power allowed in her court. Foreigners called her savage, but what they really meant was uncooperative. Her policies extended beyond religion. She restricted foreign trade, especially with the British, and limited European access to ports and resources. She created state-run industries, mobilizing thousands into forced labor to mine iron, build roads, and produce weapons. The process was brutal, deadly, and inefficient. But it meant one thing: independence. Ranavalona would rather grind her people to dust than see them wear foreign chains. She mastered the art of balance playing France against Britain, extracting goods without ceding sovereignty. She allowed just enough French trade to appear diplomatic, while keeping British influence at bay. Every treaty was a trap avoided, every delay a fortress built, and still they tried. British envoys arrived demanding concessions. She sent them home with vague promises and sharpened smiles. French explorers offered trade deals. She raised taxes and ordered them watched. When one foreign plot to overthrow her was uncovered, she had the conspirators flayed and their skulls mounted at the palace gates. She ruled like a wall, immovable, cold, silent. To European diplomats, she was infuriating. To her, people divided between terror and predish was the last queen who dared to say no. Even as drought struck, even as famine claimed thousands, even as trade collapsed, Ranavalona never opened the door to empire. And because of that, Madagascar remained independent. For over 30 years, while surrounding kingdoms fell under French banners, while missionaries rewrote African histories, while Christian converts replaced native gods, Ranavalona's land stayed sovereign. Not free, not happy, but sovereign. And maybe, in her eyes, that was the only thing that mattered. She once declared, "I will worship whom I please, I will order what I wish, no foreigner may interfere with the customs of my ancestors." And she meant it. Ranavalona was not just a queen, she was a fire-lone woman standing against the tide of empire, burning everything in her path if it meant her people would never kneel. To the world, she was monstrous. To her enemies, she was impossible. But to history, she was a woman who would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven. But every wall, no matter how thick, begins to crack. By the mid-1850s, the weight of Ranavalona's rule was suffocating the very kingdom she fought to protect. Trade had collapsed under the weight of restrictions. The isolation that once shielded Madagascar from foreign conquest now strangled its economy. Fields lay barren from drought, famine spread, disease followed. Thousands died not from war, but from starvation and neglect. Her forced labor policies, meant to keep Madagascar self-sufficient, turned into death sentences. Entire villages were conscripted to build roads, dig canals, smelt ironwork that broke bodies and killed slowly. Farmers became soldiers, mothers became widows, children became corpses. Whispers of rebellion returned, so did the purges. Even in her final years, Ranavalona trusted no one. Her court became a theater of silence. Ministers bowed with eyes averted. Servants walked like ghosts. Every gesture was measured. Every word could be fatal. Some nobles tried to flee. Others vanished within the palace walls, never to be seen again. And still she reigned. She ruled Madagascar with absolute authority for 33 years. No rival rose. No colony claimed her. No army dared invade. And then, one day, she died. Not by poison, not by dagger, not by coup, but in her bed. At the age of 79, Ranavalona, Queen of Fire, closed her eyes and simply never opened them again. There were no final words, no dramatic collapse, just the stillness of a woman who had burned everything and everyone in her way and survived it all. Her funeral was massive. Thousands lined the streets, some in mourning, others in relief. Soldiers guarded her coffin, carved from sacred wood and lined with royal silk. She was buried in the tomb of kings, surrounded by the bones of ancestors she had once invoked to justify bloodshed. But what she could not kill was time. Just 4 years after her death, her son Radama II reversed almost every policy she had enforced. He reopened trade, welcomed back missionaries, embraced Western customs, and in doing so began the slow unraveling of everything Ranavalona had bled to protect. By 1895, Madagascar fell under full French colonial control. The empire she had held back for 3 decades walked in through the front gates. And so, history judged her harshly. Western historians called her a tyrant, a lunatic, a savage. They pointed to the bodies, the poisonings, the executions, the madness. They named her Ranavalona the Cruel, and they wrote her story in red ink. But history has a way of choosing its villains, and rarely does it choose them fairly. Was she cruel? Yes. Was she paranoid? Certainly. Did she rule with terror? Without question. But she did what no man had done before or since. She held an island nation together against famine, rebellion, and empire. Alone. She never knelt to a crown not her own, never signed away a village, never traded sovereignty for silver. She preserved the soul of a kingdom, even if it cost her the hearts of its people. And now, when we speak of her, we do so in shadows, in whispers, in awe, because Ranavalona was not built to be loved. She was built to endure, and in the end, she proved that fire, no matter how feared, leaves behind one thing that cannot be erased: ash. We call her cruel, mad, bloodthirsty, a tyrant who ruled through torture, poison, and fear. And yet, what would you call a king who did the same? History is filled with emperors who butchered thousands, kings who burned cities, generals who committed genocide, yet they are studied, analyzed, even admired. Their violence is called strategy, their conquests, legacy. But when it is a woman, especially a woman who ruled alone, we call her a monster. Ranavalona did everything male rulers before her had done: consolidated power, eliminated opposition, enforced loyalty through terror. But she did it while wearing a crown made not of jewels, but of fire, alone, without foreign backing, without compromise, without apology. That, perhaps, is her greatest crime. She refused to be tamed. She didn't reform for European approval, didn't soften her rule for sympathy, didn't trade her people's identity for Western praise. She was not a queen the world could easily explain or easily forgive, and so she was condemned. But in the silence that followed her death, one truth remained. Madagascar stayed independent for 67 years longer than it should have, longer than kingdoms with armies, longer than kings with allies, longer than nations with gold. Because one woman said no. No to empire, no to conversion, no to colonization disguised as civilization, and yes to sovereignty, at any cost. So perhaps it's time we ask a different question. Not, was she cruel? But how far would you go to keep your country free? Because Ranavalona didn't just dance in the ashes of her enemies. She danced in the last moment before the fire came for her world. And for 33 years, she held the fire back.